Every modern book about habits owes a debt to William James that is rarely acknowledged. When Charles Duhigg published The Power of Habit, when James Clear outlined Atomic Habits, when behavioral scientists developed the habit loop model, they were, whether they knew it or not, refining and extending a framework that William James had already articulated in essential form in 1890. And in some respects, James got it more right than anyone who came after. James's chapter on habit in the Principles of Psychology is one of the great practical texts in the history of psychology. He began with a metaphor that has become foundational: habit as the accumulated residue of countless past experiences, grooved into the nervous system like a path worn into earth by repeated footsteps. The first time you walk across a field, you push through the grass with effort. The 10th time, a path is beginning to form. The 100th time, the path runs deep and clear. Your feet follow it without conscious direction. James was making a neurological claim before the neuroscience to back it up existed, that repeated behavior physically changes the brain, carving grooves, what we now call synaptic pathways, that make the behavior progressively easier and more automatic. Every time a neural circuit fires, he argued, it becomes slightly more likely to fire again in the same sequence. This is what modern neuroscientists call Hebbian learning. Neurons that fire together wire together. James had the essential insight a full century before the tools to verify it existed. But James was not merely interested in describing habit. He was intensely interested in how to form good habits deliberately, and his practical prescriptions remain among the most useful in the literature. He offered 4 key principles for successful habit formation that have stood up remarkably well to modern testing. The first was what he called seizing the very first possible opportunity to act on every resolution you make. The road from intention to action must be as short as possible. If you resolve to begin exercising every morning, do not plan to start next Monday. Start tomorrow. Better yet, start today. The gap between intention and first action is where most new habits die. The longer the delay, the more time for doubt, competing priorities, and inertia to fill the space. The second principle was to accumulate as many favorable circumstances as possible around the new behavior in its early stages. Stack the deck in the habit's favor. Make the desired behavior as easy as possible and the competing behavior as difficult as possible. Put the running shoes next to the bed. Remove the junk food from the house. Create environmental triggers that remind you to perform the habit. James was describing what we now call environmental design, and he understood it was more powerful than willpower in the early stages of habit formation. The third principle was never allow an exception until the new habit is securely rooted. This is perhaps James's most counterintuitive and important insight. He did not say never fail. He said treat early-stage failures as catastrophes, not because they are shameful, but because each exception makes the next exception more likely. The groove deepens with every repetition. An exception interrupts the grooving and leaves the path to the old habit still wide and smooth. Hold the standard absolutely until the new path is worn deep enough to be self-reinforcing. The fourth principle was what he called keeping the faculty of effort alive in you by a little gratuitous exercise every day. This maps precisely onto what modern researchers call ego depletion management and what others describe as willpower as a muscle. If you never exercise self-control, it weakens. Regular small exercises of discipline, doing something slightly difficult or uncomfortable by choice, even when you do not have to, keeps the habit-forming faculty sharp. Now to habit stacking, which James anticipated in his understanding of associative chains. He observed that behaviors, once habituated, tend to become linked into chains, each behavior becoming the trigger for the next. The morning routine of the experienced practitioner is not a collection of separate habits. It is a single extended automatic sequence in which each element cues the next. Getting out of bed triggers brushing teeth, which triggers making coffee, which triggers sitting at the desk, which triggers opening the journal. The whole chain runs almost without conscious direction. James's insight was that this chain structure could be deliberately exploited. You do not build new habits in isolation. You attach them to existing automatized sequences. The new behavior needs an anchor, a specific existing habit that will serve as its trigger. You do not decide to meditate every morning. You decide to meditate immediately after you make coffee. The existing habit of making coffee becomes the trigger for the new habit of meditating. The coffee pulls the meditation along. This is exactly what modern habit researchers call implementation intentions and habit stacking, and James had the essential framework in 1890. He described it in different language, but the mechanism he identified was identical. The deepest lesson from James on habit is this: you are always becoming something. Every repetition of a behavior, whether you are conscious of it or not, is deepening a groove. The question is whether the grooves you are deepening are the ones you would choose if you thought about it clearly. James believed most people never think about it clearly enough, and that this, more than any failure of intelligence or character, is why so many lives do not resemble what their owners actually want. Think about your habits consciously. Design them deliberately. And start today. Subscribe to The Psychology of William James to explore more of his practical, life-changing wisdom.